This is the Norris Group's Real Estate Investor Radio Show, the award-winning show dedicated to thought leaders shaping the real estate industry and local experts revealing their insider tips to succeed in an ever-changing real estate market. Hosted by author, investor, and hard money lender, Bruce Norris.
Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Bruce Norris, and once again with me in studio is Greg Norris, my oldest son.
Great to be here.
What are some of the warning signs that you probably have yourself a bad contractor? Prior to hiring, in other words, are there some things where you just go, okay, well, yeah.
Well, prior to hiring them, we always go through the bid process. That usually weeds out everyone that's bad, frankly. I mean, if they can't take a look at our contracts are intimidating. I would imagine for most residential contractor, because they're all inclusive. They really are very detailed. If you miss something, it could really hurt a general contractor. So most of the time, our contracts weeded out the bad ones. If they didn't, submit a bid like they were supposed to on time, if they didn't provide their, paperwork showing proof of workman's comp and an active contractor's license, just all of those things we looked for up front before we really started doing business with someone.
What percentage of the industry that buy, sell houses have that kind of contract? Like
Zero.
None?
None. Yeah.
Okay.
Most of them are doing it by hiring guys that are working for cash under the table, and that's just the way the business is done all too often.
Yeah, and that's, in a way, that's a competitive advantage because they have a lot lower cost than doing it all, but...
Probably in some ways, yes. At the same time, I'm not sure it's as competitive as you might think, because a lot of times the people that you're hiring are not very organized, and I think the inefficiencies that occur in there, you might be surprised at what the bottom number is, especially when you consider the quality of work that they're going to get out of someone like that that's not a real general contractor, and having to come back and pay someone else to come and do it 2 or 3 times to get it right is not a cheap thing.
No. Paying contractors up front for anything?
I wouldn't recommend it. If a general contractor isn't capable of funding your project, that's usually a big warning sign that they're a weak contractor and you're probably going to have problems. If they, I'm good with giving installment payments, of course, every week if they want it.
Right, after the work is done.
After the work is done, after I see the materials paid for, we have no problems with that. But in short order, we always found out that the best contractors have no problem bankrolling it for a month usually. Most of the time our contractors were billing us at the end of a job, even if it was a large job.
What recommendations would you make, saying if somebody's going to be in this business consistently for years, what can they do on behalf of the contractor to make it attractive to say, I'm always going to want to do this guy's work?
You just have to be very organized. You have to know exactly what you want so the contractor's not wasting lots of time asking you, do you want a decor plug or do you want a regular plug? Do you want purple paint or do you want cream colored paint? Just basic things. If you can, streamline the process so that they have a predictable set of guidelines that they're going by, it becomes very repetitive and it allows them to get very familiar with your process, and I think it will result in much better prices for you and much happier contractors.
How about paying them on time?
Paying them on time is a big deal. Make sure, especially if they're little guys, if they're stretched out a week, that's a long time. But if you can consistently show them that you're there for them and that you will pay them, when the bill's due, that's an unusual customer. Right? We've had some of our contractors go out into the real world, so to speak, after doing business with us, and it's a rude awakening. They've had difficulty.
Yeah, they don't sometimes get paid, period, sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. I always found that to be the best thing. I don't want to be the cheapest customer, but I wanted to be the one where they go, we'll drop everything and come there.
Right.
At what point do you give latitude on the job site to somebody? Where
give latitude?
Latitude, in other words, say, okay, we're opening something up, and okay, it's not what we thought, or it's worse than we thought. Do you always want to get involved in that, physically going to see that, or at some point do you have confidence in the contractor saying, I've got to do this to make it right?
it would probably just depend on the contractor. I mean, if I had a lot of experience with them and I knew I could trust what they were telling me, I probably wouldn't think twice about it. Maybe send me a picture. That's the beauty of the technology these days.
That is true.
A lot of times you can just have them take a picture and send it to me so I can see what you're talking about. Because it is important to know the business. I mean, the fact that I had such a strong construction background coming into this, I can see baloney from a mile away. When I got a line of baloney sold to me, or attempted to be sold to me, I was like, no, I know better than that. So it definitely helps knowing construction. I feel like that was a big advantage. But yes,
I remember some of the projects I'd come in. We'd have those boot camps, and I'd see red paint on the floor like an X, and I was like, oh, he's moving walls again. Where did you get that gear or gift that you look at a structure and say, we can make this better flow or whatever? I mean, I don't have none of that. I have nothing like that.
Well, I guess I just looked at something, and most of the time it was structures that had already been altered. So a lot of times what you were dealing with was a former owner messing up a good layout.
Oh, okay.
So most of the time you're restoring it
to
to something that makes sense. That's most of the time what occurred when we were moving walls, is just trying to fix a layout that had been badly messed up.
So you've gone through 650 homes. What's the desirable house that you want to try to get, and what's one that you've decided isn't worth doing?
Well, by a long shot, the easiest ones are the newer homes. I'd say 1995 or newer. So, I mean, I guess that's almost 20 years old now. I mean, you start getting past 20 years, you just have a whole different construction issue. I mean, you're going to be dealing with a lot more. So it's much more predictable there. I mean, especially if you're new to the business, you need to stay in light rehab. So heavy rehab is going to eat you alive. You better stay on something light until you really get your feet underneath you, and then, tread in lightly if you're going for a heavy rehab, because it's probably tougher than you realize.
Those are ones that is there some type that you just go, yeah, I'd just rather not do it? And does it have to do with the extensive rehab?
At least at Trusty Sales, I found it exceedingly difficult to get a discount that was big enough for a heavy rehab. Most of the time, if we had a rehab that was over $40,000, I almost always regretted buying it. That was for sure. I mean, in the private world, where you're not buying it at a Trusty Sale, I think a bigger discount can be gotten usually, and then it makes sense. If you're buying it instead of what we were buying it at, which is probably on average 87 to 88% minus repairs. If you can get it down to 75 to 80, you have a lot more breathing room there. And if you're wrong on your repair estimate, which is very easy to do on a heavy rehab, you've got some wiggle room.
Sometimes the California market is also pretty forgiving because it goes up while you have this project. So sometimes you get bonus to like $25,000 of money that wasn't expect.
I guess if it took you a long time to get the work done, I actually felt like we had a pretty good process of appraising the house, so that I would be shocked if we weren't literally 99% of the time hitting our number that we expected to sell it at from the very beginning, because we saw the movement. I mean, your competitors are noticing this too. Everyone's looking at it going, okay, is it going up or down? Where are we going to have to appraise this at to have a shot at really buying it?
Right.
So it's the trusty sale business is brutal and cutthroat, and you're dealing with highly skilled people that really know how to turn a house well. So it makes you grow.
How many properties would you appraise in a day when you're going full tilt? I mean, this is from a seated position and a screen, by the way.
Yeah, probably some days 75. That was not uncommon.
And you have to be accurate because you just spent a chunk of money and there's very little wiggle room. That's a lot of pressure.
It is. It's a lot of pressure. So, I mean, really, appraising is probably one of the most important parts of any process for flipping a home. Whether you're doing it trusty sales or otherwise, you have to be able to know what that number is and know when you're stepping into something that could be problematic. So I've definitely learned a lot about learning how to stay away from certain inventory that's going to be more challenging. That's probably what we learned the most is, okay, what resells well and what doesn't, and if it's not going to resell well, what's the factor that you need to put in there for something that's odd?
I don't know how long it was ago, but we went to Florida based on some of the charts that I looked at. I thought that would be a good opportunity, and we probably bought 60 or 70 homes
about 60 homes
in a year or
about
something
2 years.
like that.
We've been there for 2 years, but we're shutting it down now.
Right, so we're unwinding, and but was by and large it was profitable. What was different about Florida inventory than California?
Well, in Florida, it's a strange mixture of, in my mind, it's something like a mixture between California and Texas. You know, you get in the main cities and things will sell quickly, and you'll get some competition for buying it. You know, there's a real market. If you get outside of the main cities, and stuff that looks, like tract houses, looks like the type of inventory you'd want, it's more like a Texas mentality where renting is just fine, and people are just not, big buyers. So that was a big learning curve in Florida, just trying to really understand. I mean, just because you got a house that you could find an appraisal, a comp for, didn't mean that you were going to sell it in the next year.
Exactly.
So even though the comps look stable and you look like, there's not much competition on the market, when you go to sell it, it just sits and nobody shows it.
Yeah, you realize, okay, maybe there's one buyer a year that shows up to this tract.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I certainly didn't account for. I took advantage of it in one way, saying, okay, they have a 4-year foreclosure process, so therefore they have lots of REOs and all that stuff. So I know that foreclosures are going to still be an active participant. But when we bought these houses, they were also uncared for 4 years.
They were sometimes they'd been vacant for a long time. For the most part, that really didn't hurt us too bad.
Okay.
Yeah, that part wasn't as bad as I feared it might be, especially because I'd heard that you can get mold growing in your ducting systems with the humidity of Florida and stuff like that. We didn't really have too bad of problems with any of that. Probably the worst was just roofs and air conditioning systems. Those go bad rather rapidly in Florida.
Why?
I think it's just the wear and tear. I mean, in Florida, when you have all that humidity, air conditioners will run 24/7, and after 12, 13 years, they're done. California, you get 25 years out of a system. It's just different, and the sun and all the rain that the roofs take a beating. And I mean, a roof that would last 30, 40 years in California, you're only going to get 15 years out of it in Florida. So those are expensive items.
And it seemed like when people were inspecting the properties that you were finding that they were requiring a roof or requesting that saying that would be necessary. You would have looked at the roof and say, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's probably because it was more of a buyer's market at that point, not a seller's market. I mean, They had a little more power in the market to say, hey, this roof only has 2 or 3 years left on it. I'm not interested in getting a $7,000 bill, 2 years after I move in for replacing the entire roof. I want something for it now. So I really hadn't, when we first got there, we really hadn't factored in that mentality that was difficult to overcome. So I mean, we did find some strategies that would work. We would give a credit towards a new roof, anything to try to keep from replacing it, especially if it would pass inspection. But it was challenging. It was definitely a different mentality.
There's a couple of things that we ran into that I don't think we ever had run into in California. One of them, Chinese drywall.
Yes, I had never run into Chinese drywall before. That is quite an interesting process.
So what did that entail? Ultimately, how did we end up solving that, and how do you even know you have it?
You can know that you have it probably in 2 ways. Your house is going to have a funny smell, and number 2, when you pull the electrical wires out of the wall, when you pull a plug out, you'll see tarnishing on the bare copper wire. That the chemical that's in the Chinese drywall corrodes the exterior of the copper. Or discolors it, I should say. It doesn't really deteriorate it. It just discolors it because of it. So you have to hire an engineer that specializes in it. He has a special gun that they go around and test every piece of drywall. And you basically have to find out where that drywall is. It's very much like hazardous material where you have to plastic everything off and everything has to be HEPA-vacked. And it's quite an ordeal. I mean, it's like dealing with lead or asbestos, basically. And taking all the drywall off a house is a pretty big deal.
But it can also be part drywall for a Chinese drywall and part regular. Or is
yes, one particular house that we had to deal with it on, all of the upstairs for some reason they decided to put normal drywall on. So only downstairs had the issue. So we had to tear off virtually everything downstairs. For some reason, the drywall that they put on the ceilings most of the time did not have the Chinese drywall stuff in it. So yeah, it's but that's why you pay the guys. They come out there with a gun and they tell you exactly where you've got it and where you don't, and you just have to tear it all out and very meticulously get rid of all the dust. I mean, nothing can be left behind.
How would you know that problem exists before you bought that house at a trustee sale? Any list somewhere?
There's no list. We checked with the counties. We said, do you guys have a list of properties that have potential drywall issues? And what I found out is I just had to literally check through old listings. Anytime I was not familiar with a tract, I would have to go through old listings and see if there was any mention of Chinese drywall. If there was mention of Chinese drywall, so I mean, it was basically an extra step in the appraisal process, which is time consuming. It takes time to look through 50 appraisals and go, okay.
Yeah, you're not talking about the property you just bought or the one you're going to buy. You're talking about 50 that you might buy one. You have to do all of it for everything.
Right.
Yeah, that's just amazing work.
Yeah, Florida was a whole new level of detailedness because I had to do the title work as well.
I was going to say, that was...
Yeah.
Now, let's touch base on that one because, as you know, we're going to get in the loan business there. Mm-hmm. So when you say in California, what was the service why was it different? You were dealing with a title company that was sending you stuff, right, but I don't know that they were analyzing it.
They were. First American we worked with in California, they would look at the title, they would analyze it, and they would basically give me any warning problems. In Florida, no one was willing to touch that. No one wanted the liability of saying, yeah, we interpreted this data for you. So instead, I get 100-page documents, and I have to look through it. And I have to find out from the 100-page document, whether or not I have any potential title issues there. So a lot different process.
Wow. Are you good at title now, I guess?
I am.
I'm glad to know that. That's funny. Sinkholes. That's another thing. In Texas, I remember there was something about this type of soil they had that it caused foundation problems.
Soil moves a lot.
Is that a similar situation in some parts of Florida, or is that water being so close to the surface there?
Sinkhole is kind of a misused term in Florida.
Okay. Because
they use settling issues and actual sinkhole issues as the same issue.
Okay.
So everything's a sinkhole, and it's not. Sometimes it's a settling issue. We bought a couple of houses that had foundation issues. Both of them were settling issues, not sinkhole issues. Okay. Sinkhole issues is when you have the ground underneath your house being undermined by literally like an underground river or an underground spring. It just eats away the soil until all of a sudden your house just disappears.
Yeah,
literally
that's
gone, or at the very least sinks into the ground significantly. So I don't think I ever had to deal with a sinkhole house for reals, but we did have to do with foundation damage out there.
And now is that more common there than it is in California?
I don't think I ever had to deal with a foundation damage like I did in Florida. Yeah, we've run across them, but we never had to deal with them in probably 600 houses in California. So it's definitely more common.
Where you had to go down to the bedrock and do all that.
There's no bedrock.
There's no bedrock in Florida.
Even the jacks that they use and to support the foundation is completely different. They literally come in with augers and they auger them down sometimes 70, 80 feet in through sand. Because that's all it is. It's just sand. That's all I got.
Wow.
Florida's a big sandbar. That's all they got.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the rental market. You've experienced Texas.
I have.
So Texas, as far as a rental market, you own property for quite a long time. So,
about 12 years in Texas.
So what was the nature of ability to raise rents there for a whole decade?
Until literally the last year, the rents have stayed flat for almost 12 years.
Okay.
It's been terrible.
And price for the longest time, was it also pretty stable or flat?
I thought I was buying it at a good time back in 2004 and 5, and prices actually dropped further than when I bought it. Not much, probably 5% or something like that. But I mean, they're probably only up now 25 or 30% over what I purchased them 13 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, the appreciation in Texas was incredibly disappointing.
But the rent, it didn't go anywhere either.
It did not.
Okay.
I will never. I won't be stepping foot in Texas to buy rentals anytime soon. I learned a lot about, really understanding a market better. If I had really checked out a couple of things now that I know better, I think I would be able to identify the type of rental market I would want to be in going to a new state again.
Okay.
It's a lot like analyzing Florida, where there were certain areas that had a cycle, a real cycle where you can see prices rise significantly and then fall. In Texas, they don't do much anything, ever.
Yeah, this is a big rise for them.
Yeah, 25% in 2 years. Like, this hasn't happened, like, ever.
Since the oil, probably the oil fields first started.
Right.
California now, you've had a rental, not that it's always been rented, but the rental value on the condo, let's say, how has that changed over time? And has it been really aggressive recently?
The retail value is definitely pretty strong for the condos. The condos are still being held back on their value because of the lack of financing. Okay. So that's still a problem. If they can't get the FHA cert, you have to have 20% down or more, depending on the percentage of ownership in the complex, in order to be able to get a loan. So
let's just make sure everybody understands that. So FHA is saying if it's not a certain percent owner occupied, we're not interested in 4% or 3% down or whatever it is. Right. Okay.
And even a conventional loan, at a certain point, if too many of the condos in the complex are owned by one investor, we ran across that where a builder still owned something like 40% of the inventory, you could not get a conventional loan on the property. It had to be cash.
How about rent raises there in the last few years?
It's been crazy strong. I think my 2-bedroom condo is up for rent right now at $1,575, and when I first rented it out, I think it was $1,200.
Foxhole? Mm-hmm. It just rented for $1,895.
Wow, that's great.
When Mike O'Neill said that number, I was like, what? He got it in a day.
Wow.
So I guess it was right. So Florida now, you're involved in holding some properties, and you've gone particularly after condos.
I have gone after condos, a very specific type. I didn't want the type without garages or cars, ones with carports. I wanted very specifically condos that had garages. I found a particularly unique little community that has actually each individual condo has its own pool and enclosed yard. So I mean, it's just a very odd inventory, but the last peak it went for $250, and I'm buying them for the low 100s basically.
So you got a really good upside, and there's a demand for the rental.
The rents are very strong there for price. I mean, it's I was buying them for probably an average 120, putting 10 to 15 into them, and the rents are like $1,400 to $1,500 a month for these places. So the rent's very strong. The HOA is not that bad. It's $350-ish or something like that. So. And
these units are how old about?
The particular units I'm in are built in 1980.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's next?
What's next?
It's not a pile of real estate.
Right. You mean going, okay. Yeah. Well, I'm actually going to kind of retire from flipping real estate for a while. I'm going back to school, and I'd like to work towards becoming a lawyer and getting a degree in political science.
Very cool.
Yeah. A fun new adventure.
You've been working hard for a long time. You got married at 18, and so I'm just thrilled that you have a choice that you want to do.
I feel blessed to have a choice. It's pretty neat to, if you ever play the game Robert Kiyosaki's Rat Race, I got to finish the rat race. So.
Yeah, you're out of it and on the other side of it and having some choices. Well, thank you for all you've done for the company and for myself. Solving Rosamond was a very big deal, and we've always taken care of people's money really well. we've had our challenges, but we've got on the other side of them every time. So
It's been an honor and a privilege.
Okay, Greg. Love you. Thank you very much.
Love you too.
For more information on hard money loans and upcoming events with the Norris Group, check out thenorrisgroup.com. For information on passive investing with trust deeds, visit tngtrustdeeds.com.